I can still see it in my mind like a photograph. The moment everything shifted. The air in the office was heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and printer toner. The hum of fluorescent lights above mixing with the faint echo of forklifts outside. I was leaning over my desk, reviewing the weekly logistics schedule, when my boss, Daniel Carter, stepped into my office without knocking. He had that thin smile he used when he wanted to remind people who was in charge. "Alice," he said slowly, like he was testing the word, "you'll regret it if you go against me." It wasn't the first time he'd tried intimidation, but this time there was something sharper in his voice, something final. I didn't flinch. I just nodded once. Understood. What I didn't say, what I kept behind a calm face, was that he'd already made a mistake big enough to bury him. I'd been at Carter Logistics for nearly 9 years. I started in scheduling, but over time I became the unofficial problem solver, the one who caught mistakes before they became disasters. In an industry where a late shipment could mean millions lost, that mattered. But Daniel never cared about that. He was more interested in corner offices, big contracts, and making sure every success had his name on it. People like me were there to make him look competent. That's why I noticed the email he didn't. It was a simple lease renewal notice for our largest distribution warehouse. The subject line was dull. Action required. Renewal deadline. I knew the building, 120,000 square feet of prime industrial space right off the highway, the hub for over 60% of our shipments. The renewal date was in 3 weeks. If it lapsed, the property could be leased to someone else immediately. Daniel had forwarded the email to operations with a note. "Handle this." Operations, of course, assumed he meant it was already handled, and that's how things got lost. I read the attached lease twice. My fingers drummed against the desk. If someone else secured that lease, Carter Logistics couldn't operate in the region without massive delays. Every major shipment, especially the one I'd heard him bragging about at the last executive meeting, a $20 million import deal, relied on that warehouse. And Daniel hadn't even set a reminder. For days, I wrestled with it. Part of me thought I should warn him. After all, my paycheck came from this company. But then I thought about the last time I'd brought him a problem. 3 months earlier, I'd flagged a routing error that would have delayed a contract delivery by 5 days. His response? A smirk and, "Alice, stick to your lane. I've got experts for that." He didn't have experts. He had people who feared him too much to argue. That night, I stayed late, pretending to be working on freight schedules. The warehouse manager was on shift, and we got to talking. Casually, I asked if he'd heard anything about the lease. He hadn't. And the property owner had been trying to get someone from Carter's office to respond. That was when I knew. If Daniel didn't respect my voice, maybe he'd hear me in another way, one he couldn't ignore. I called my brother-in-law, Mark, a commercial real estate agent who owed me a favor. I told him I needed information, fast. Within 24 hours, I had the full terms for the warehouse lease. The renewal window was open, but closing in less than 2 weeks. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't impossible. The security deposit was steep, but I had savings. The kind I'd been building quietly for years, the kind Daniel assumed I didn't have because, in his mind, I was just another replaceable cog. Mark's voice was steady over the phone. "If you want it, we can have the papers drawn up tomorrow. But once you sign, it's yours. Full control." I didn't hesitate. "Do it." The morning Daniel gave me that smirk and told me I'd regret going against him was the same morning the lease documents were delivered to my inbox. He didn't know it yet, but the building that housed his most valuable shipments was now mine. I signed, wired the deposit, and by 3:15 p.m., the deal was finalized. The confirmation email felt heavier than it should have. This wasn't just a property. It was leverage. I wasn't reckless. I wasn't going to announce it. But I also wasn't going to forget the way he had looked at me when he said those words. 2 weeks later, when his $20 million shipment from overseas was scheduled to arrive, I would find out just how pale a man can go when he realizes the ground he's standing on belongs to someone else. And by then, there would be nothing he could do to stop it. The next morning, the warehouse felt different. Not in a physical way. The same rows of high shelves stacked with pallets, the same hum of the industrial fans. But to me, it was no longer his warehouse. It was mine. I parked 2 blocks away, not wanting anyone to see me arrive. The property manager, a thin man in his 50s with an easy smile, met me at the side entrance. "You're the new tenant," he said, shaking my hand. His voice had a hint of surprise, like he'd expected a corporate rep in a tailored suit, not a woman in a plain blazer and jeans. "That's right," I replied. "And I'd like to keep it quiet for now. No changes to daily operations until I say otherwise." He nodded, pulling a set of keys from his pocket. "You've got full access. Lease terms are exactly as you saw. You can sublet, terminate, or renegotiate as you see fit." The metal keys felt cold in my palm. Heavy, in more ways than one. For the next week, I went about my normal routine at Carter Logistics. I still clocked in at 8:30, still sent the same emails, still pretended Daniel's voice didn't grate on my nerves when he barked orders down the hallway. The trick was patience. If I moved too early, he could adapt. The plan was to wait until his $20 million shipment landed, the one he'd been bragging about for months, and then let reality hit him like a steel door slamming shut. At lunch breaks, I'd step outside, phone pressed to my ear, speaking quietly with the warehouse security supervisor. His name was Jeff, a no-nonsense man who had been guarding that property for nearly 15 years. "I'll follow whatever instructions you give me," Jeff said on our first call. "But you sure you want to play it this way? Daniel's the type to make trouble." I smiled faintly, even though he couldn't see it. "That's the beauty of it, Jeff. I'm not making trouble. I'm just enforcing my rights as the legal tenant." By Thursday, Daniel's mood was almost smug. He strode into the office that morning with a cup of coffee from the overpriced cafe downtown, chatting loudly on his phone about streamlined operations and a new era for the company. I caught snippets of his conversation with the operations manager. "All customs paperwork is cleared, offloading scheduled for the 14th. Trucks will run straight from the port to the warehouse." Flawless execution. I kept my eyes on my computer screen, fingers resting on the keyboard, while inside my heart beat a steady drum. The 14th. That was the day. On Friday, I drove past the warehouse after work. The sunset threw long shadows across the loading bays, the chain-link fence casting dark stripes over the asphalt. I pulled into a side lot and sat there for a moment, watching as forklifts shuffled pallets inside. That building had been Carter Logistics' beating heart for over a decade. Without it, the company couldn't function in the region. Daniel knew it. I knew it. And in less than a week, everyone else would know it too. I spent the weekend finalizing my plan. Not because I thought Daniel might challenge my ownership. The lease was airtight. But because I knew he'd try to spin it. People like him didn't admit defeat. They invented alternate versions of reality. I made copies of the lease, the payment receipts, and the property manager's confirmation letter. One set went into my home safe. Another went into a manila envelope at my sister's house. By Sunday night, I felt a strange calm. Daniel called a morning meeting. His energy was electric. He paced the front of the conference room, tossing numbers onto the whiteboard like confetti. "This shipment," he said, tapping the board with the marker, "is going to double our quarterly profits. This is the big one, people. Every truck, every driver, every warehouse hand, all hands on deck." There was applause. A couple of the managers exchanged grins. I kept mine small, careful, just enough to look like I was part of the enthusiasm. Inside, I was counting down hours. That afternoon, Jeff called me. "Just so you know," he said, "Daniel sent a junior manager over here today to walk through the warehouse. I told him access was restricted without your written authorization." I could almost hear the pause in Daniel's day when that message got back to him. But he wouldn't panic yet. Not until the trucks rolled up and he couldn't get inside. "Good," I told Jeff. "Hold your ground." The office was buzzing. Schedules printed, driver assignments posted, everyone preparing for the massive offload. Daniel was in rare form, shaking hands, slapping backs, telling anyone who'd listen about decisive leadership. I kept my head down, double-checking invoices in the system I knew he wouldn't be able to process by tomorrow afternoon. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through every possible reaction Daniel might have. Denial, rage, bargaining. What I didn't imagine was him walking away quietly. That wasn't who he was. But tomorrow, when the trucks pulled in and Jeff met him at the gate, it wouldn't matter. The papers in my name would speak louder than anything he could say. The morning of the shipment, the air felt different. The sky was still pale with dawn, and the streets around the port were already alive with rumbling engines and the hiss of air brakes. I parked 2 blocks away from the warehouse again, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. My phone buzzed. It was Jeff, the warehouse security supervisor. "They're here," he said simply. By 8:30 a.m., the convoy of trucks had pulled into the access road, 20 of them, each carrying containers packed with goods worth more than I'd make in a lifetime. This was Daniel's crown jewel, the $20 million shipment he'd been bragging about for months. I could almost picture his face, smug and confident, walking up to the gate expecting it to swing open like it always had. But it didn't. From my spot down the street, I could see Jeff standing at the gatehouse, arms crossed, the morning sun glinting off his sunglasses. Daniel was in his tailored navy suit, phone in one hand, gesturing sharply with the other. I couldn't hear them, but I didn't need to. Jeff had told me exactly what he'd say if Daniel tried to get in without authorization. Access restricted. Property is under new tenancy. Please contact the leaseholder. Daniel's body language changed fast. The confident stride turned into a stiff stance, shoulders squared, jaw tight. He waved his phone toward Jeff, no doubt showing him some email or company ID. Jeff didn't move. He just shook his head slowly. At 8:47, my phone rang. The caller ID read, "Daniel Carter." I let it buzz twice before answering. "Alice," he barked, skipping any greeting. "Why is my shipment being blocked at the warehouse?" I kept my voice level. "It's not your warehouse." There was a pause, like he hadn't processed the words. "What the hell are you talking about?" "The lease wasn't renewed," I said evenly. "It became available. I secured it 2 weeks ago." His voice sharpened, almost a hiss. "You... what? That's theft. It's perfectly legal." I cut in. "I'm the registered tenant. I have the paperwork and payment receipts to prove it. Security has been instructed to deny entry to unauthorized personnel." "You've lost your mind," he snapped. "You can't run a facility like that. You think you can hold my shipment hostage? I'll have you in court before lunch." I didn't raise my voice. "Then I suggest you speak to your lawyers before the goods spoil." By 9:15, the tension had spilled into the office. Phones were ringing nonstop, the operations manager pacing like a man on hot coals. Word traveled fast. The convoy was stuck at the gate, drivers on the clock, port schedules being thrown into chaos. I walked into the office like it was any other day, a folder tucked under my arm. People looked up as I passed, their conversations dropping mid-sentence. Daniel wasn't at his desk. He was still at the warehouse trying to force his way in. At 10 a.m., I emailed the board of directors. Subject line, urgent, warehouse leaseholder update. I kept it short, attaching a scanned copy of the signed lease, the payment confirmation, and a notarized statement from the property manager. The body of the email simply read, "For clarity, the warehouse in question is under my legal tenancy. All access decisions are in accordance with the signed lease agreement. I have informed Mr. Carter of this on multiple occasions. Please advise on next steps." I hit send, sat back in my chair, and let the silence hang. Around 11:30, Daniel stormed into the office. His tie was loosened, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. He slammed his door so hard the glass rattled. 2 minutes later, his assistant appeared at my desk. Her voice was low, urgent. "He wants you in his office. Now." I walked in without knocking. Daniel was standing behind his desk, both palms pressed into the surface. "You think you've won something here?" he said, his voice low and shaking. "You're playing with people's livelihoods." I said slowly, "I've taken control of a situation you neglected." If you'd read the renewal notice, we wouldn't be here. He pointed a finger at me. This isn't over. I will bury you for this. I met his eyes. You already tried burying me. This is me digging out. By mid-afternoon, the board had responded. A short, clipped email. We will review the situation. Please refrain from further escalation until counsel is consulted. But the damage was done. The shipment was stuck. The drivers were racking up fees. The company was bleeding money by the hour. And I knew Daniel. He wouldn't just be worried about the logistics. He'd be terrified about how this looked to the board. By sunrise the next day, the street outside the warehouse looked like a parking lot. Drivers leaned against bumpers, coffee steaming in the cold air, radios chattering about layovers and penalties. Jeff texted me a photo of the line. 18 rigs staged tight to the curb, 2 still circling the block. At 7:12 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. Alice Harris? A crisp voice asked. This is Officer Neal with the Port Authority Police. We've received a complaint alleging unlawful interference with commerce at the Hanover Street facility. There it was. Daniel's influence, quick and sharp. I'm the tenant of record, I said. Lease executed 2 weeks ago, no interference. I'm controlling access to my property. We'll need to see documentation, he replied. Happy to show you, I said. I'll meet you at the gate in 20 minutes. I pulled on a plain black blazer and drove the same quiet route I'd been taking all week. The city felt muted. Low cloud ceiling, a gull skimming the river. I parked 2 blocks away again and walked the rest on foot, paperwork in a file folder tucked under my arm. At the gate, 2 PAPD officers stood by Jeff's booth. Daniel was there too. Tie perfect, eyes bright with a confidence that said he thought he'd finally found leverage. He nodded to the officers as if they worked for him. Morning, I said to the officers, not looking at Daniel. Here are the documents. I handed over the signed lease, the wire confirmation, the insurance certificates, and the property manager's letter acknowledging delivery of keys. Officer Neal studied the papers, his partner flipping pages, lips moving silently. Neal glanced at Daniel. Mr. Carter, you said your company leases this property. Daniel's jaw flexed. We did. For 10 years. Her lease, he swung a hand toward me, is a stunt. She's an employee acting against her employer. Neal kept his eyes on the documents. That's a labor matter. We're here about property and access. He turned a page, then another. Everything appears in order, Ms. Harris. Daniel's voice dropped into a hiss he thought the officers couldn't hear. You realize you can't operate a warehouse, right? You don't have staff, certifications. I don't need to operate it to control entry, I said evenly. But if you'd like access, we can execute a short-term sublease with standard rates and indemnities. For a heartbeat, his face went still. Pride versus pragmatism. He picked pride. Not a chance, he said. I'm not paying you to enter a building I've paid for a decade. Then you're welcome to petition the court, I replied. Until then, my security will follow my instructions. He turned away, phone already at his ear. Get legal, now. Jeff gave me the smallest nod, the kind you make when you know you're about to ride out a storm. By 10:05, the next front hit. A white SUV rolled up with city inspections stenciled on the door. 2 inspectors stepped out, one with a clipboard, the other with a small case. Complaint of safety deficiencies, the lead inspector said. We'll need to do a walkthrough. Daniel leaned in, smooth as oil. Thank you for coming. We've had concerns for months. I didn't bite. Of course, I said to the inspector. I'm the tenant. I'll accompany you. Jeff keyed us in. The warehouse smelled like dust and cold metal. We walked the perimeter, eyewash stations, emergency exits, sprinkler risers, while forklifts sat silent like sleeping animals. The inspector's flashlight beams skimmed caged ladders and exit signage. Exit sign bulb out by dock 3, he said to his partner. Click. Eyewash tag expired last quarter. Click. Spill kit needs replenishment. He looked at me. Minor issues. Correct today. Send photographic proof. No citation. I nodded. We'll fix them by noon. Outside, Daniel tried to read the inspector's face. He didn't find what he wanted. The SUV pulled away. I called a mobile safety vendor and had replacement bulbs, eye wash cartridges, and spill kits delivered within an hour. Jeff installed the bulb himself while I knelt on the concrete swapping the eye wash canister, fingers numb from the cold water. We took photos with timestamps and emailed them in. The inspector replied 2 minutes later. Received. No further action. At 11:31, a courier appeared at my gate with a thick envelope addressed to me. Carter Logistics, Inc. v. Alice Harris. Emergency motion for a temporary restraining order. Of course. I scanned quickly. The motion argued I'd misappropriated proprietary information, interfered with business relations, and acted in bad faith. There was a hearing set for 2 p.m. Judge Morales, Department 24. I texted my attorney, Priya, TRO at 2 p.m., sending PDFS now. Her reply came fast. On it. Meet me at the courthouse at 1:30. Bring originals. I sent Jeff a brief instruction. Keep drivers updated. Hand out bottled water from the pallet we'd bought. Keep the tone calm. And Jeff? I added. If anyone gets heated, call me first. He texted back a thumbs up and a photo of 2 drivers laughing over bad coffee. It soothed something tight in my chest. At 1:27, I walked into the courthouse with my folder pressed tight to my side. The hallway outside Department 24 was full of that particular tension you only feel in public buildings. People clutching papers, voices kept low by unspoken rules. Priya arrived in a navy suit and sneakers, efficient as always. Judge Morales is fair, she said. He'll want clean lines. Are you the tenant? Did you use company resources? Any evidence of bad faith? Lease, personal funds, off hours, I said, handing her the originals. I also offered a sublease this morning. He declined. Priya's eyebrow flicked up. Perfect. That goes to mitigation. Inside the courtroom, Daniel sat at counsel table with 2 lawyers I didn't recognize. He didn't look at me as we took our seats. The hearing was brisk. Daniel's counsel led with righteous urgency. $20 million shipment, irreplaceable timelines, an employee weaponizing a technicality. When it was Priya's turn, she spoke like she was threading a needle. Your Honor, Ms. Harris is the lawful tenant. She paid with personal funds. She has not disclosed proprietary information, and she offered a reasonable, industry-standard sublease this morning that would have allowed access while the parties negotiated. Carter Logistics declined. Judge Morales steepled his fingers. Mr. Carter, did your company renew the lease? Silence. His counsel answered instead. There was a misunderstanding. Did you renew it, yes or no? No, Your Honor. And did you decline the sublease offer? A beat. We did. The judge sighed. The court will not issue extraordinary relief to fix a problem of your own making. Motion denied without prejudice. He rapped his gavel lightly. Set a case management conference for next week. I strongly encourage the parties to resolve access via a temporary agreement. We filed out. In the hall, Daniel finally looked at me. The confidence was thinner now, stretched over something brittle. You think a denied motion means you've won? He said quietly. You don't know who you've picked a fight with. I kept my voice level. I didn't pick a fight. I signed a lease you ignored. I've given you 2 off-ramps. You chose neither. His jaw worked. You'll regret this. I almost smiled. You already said that. Back at the warehouse, late afternoon light slanted across the yard. Drivers shuffled, engines idled. I gathered the managers from the trucking company in a small semicircle. I spoke plainly. I will authorize unloading under a 72-hour temporary access agreement. Standard rates, liability on your carrier. My counsel will email documents in 30 minutes. You'll be paid by Carter Logistics. Your time will be counted. No one leaves unpaid for waiting. Men and women whose schedules lived and died on paper nodded. It wasn't victory. It was relief shaped like a plan. At 5:22, my email pinged. The board's chair. We saw the ruling. We need to talk tomorrow at 9 a.m. Bring your documentation. I closed my laptop and leaned against the cool metal of the gatehouse, the day's noise washing over me. Diesel, chatter, the slow clank of a chain. I should have felt triumphant. I didn't. I felt tired and awake and very aware of how many people had been dragged into a fight that could have been avoided by a single calendar reminder. I looked down the line of trucks and thought about the drivers, about Jeff changing a light bulb without being asked, about the inspector who'd chosen reason over theater, about Priya walking fast in sneakers because speed matters more than appearances. The email hit my inbox before the sun was up. Subject: Conduct investigation. Alice Harris. It was sent to all staff, not just executives, not just department heads, every single person with a Carter Logistics email address. I clicked it open. Daniel had written it himself. The language was cold, formal, and calculated. An employee of this company has engaged in actions detrimental to our operations, including interference with a critical shipment and misappropriation of business opportunities. While the matter is before legal review, please direct all questions to management. He hadn't needed to name me. He put it right there in the first paragraph. My name in bold. By 6:10, my phone was lighting up. Calls from coworkers, texts from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Some messages were sympathetic, others less so. What happened? Why would you do this? I knew this was coming. The smear. The attempt to make me look reckless, disloyal, dangerous. If he could turn enough people against me, the board might find it easier to cut me loose and make me the scapegoat. By the time I walked into the boardroom at 9, the temperature in the company felt different. The quiet nods I used to get in the hall had been replaced by sideways glances, whispered conversations that stopped when I passed. Richard Miller, the board chair, was already seated at the head of the table. He gestured for me to take the seat opposite him. Daniel was there, 2 chairs to my right, leaning back like he'd just finished telling the winning joke at a party. Ms. Harris, Richard began. You've seen the email. Yes, I said, my voice steady. We need to hear your account before we determine next steps. I placed a neatly organized folder on the table and slid it toward him. Every document you need is in there. Lease agreement, payment confirmation, insurance certificates, inspection clearance, and a copy of the sublease offer I made to Mr. Carter. It also includes the court's denial of his TRO request. Daniel smirked faintly, but Richard didn't look at him. He opened the folder, flipping through the pages. The other board members leaned in. You acted in a personal capacity? Richard asked. Yes, sir. Using personal funds on personal time. I did not use company resources, and I did not share any confidential information. And you offered a sublease immediately after taking possession? I did. He refused. Daniel leaned forward. Because it was extortion. It was market rate, I said, turning to face him fully. And it would have allowed the shipment to proceed on schedule. Richard raised a hand. Enough. We're not here to rehash personal animosity. We're here to decide if Ms. Harris violated her employment terms. The head of legal, who had been silent until now, cleared her throat. We've reviewed the documents. There's no evidence Ms. Harris acted unlawfully. The warehouse was not under lease by Carter Logistics at the time of her signing. All filings are in order. A low murmur went around the table. Daniel's jaw tightened. Richard sat back, steepling his fingers. Then the question becomes, is it in the company's best interest to continue under the current leadership structure? For the first time, Daniel's confidence cracked. This is absurd. Mr. Carter, Richard said sharply, you neglected to renew a critical lease, jeopardized a major shipment, attempted to bypass the legal tenant, and circulated an internal memo naming her as a liability before this board reviewed the facts. Silence. Richard turned to me. Ms. Harris, the board recognizes your role in preventing further damage. We'd like to offer you a formal position overseeing property and compliance strategy. Direct report to the board. Would you accept? I nodded once. I would. on the condition that my name is cleared with the same visibility as it was accused. By noon, a second company-wide email went out. Subject: clarification regarding warehouse lease. It read, "Following review, the board confirms that Alice Harris acted lawfully, in a personal capacity, and with the intent to mitigate operational risk. She will be assuming the role of Director of Property and Compliance Strategy, reporting directly to the board. We thank her for her diligence and professionalism." The replies started almost instantly. "Congrats," from some. Didn't see that coming from others. The tone in the office shifted again. Daniel's departure wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no thrown objects. Just a closed-door meeting in the afternoon, followed by him walking out with a cardboard box, sunglasses on despite the cloudy sky. I didn't watch him go. I was in my new office, a modest space on the top floor, signing the final agreement for the temporary sublease so the drivers could unload the shipment. The warehouse gates swung open the next morning at 8 o'clock sharp. Jeff sent me a photo of the first container being rolled inside. A simple caption, "Back in business." A week later, Richard stopped by my office. He set down 2 coffees and leaned against the doorframe. "You handled yourself well," he said. "Better than some of us expected." I smiled faintly. I didn't set out to win. I just refused to lose on someone else's terms. He nodded. "Sometimes that's all it takes to change the game." I never saw Daniel again. I heard he took a job with a smaller competitor out west. Maybe he learned from what happened. Maybe not. That wasn't my concern anymore. What mattered was that I had a seat at the table now. And not because someone gave it to me out of pity or politics, but because I earned it. The lesson? In business, people like Daniel count on silence. They count on you accepting the scraps you're given. But sometimes the smallest overlooked detail, a date on a lease, a clause in a contract, can be the lever that moves everything. And when you find that lever, you don't just hold it. You use it.